Yeah, did you know Marvel Snap has some secret cards that have been lost to time? Mephisto here behind me is one of them, but basically there are a series of cards that have existed in the Marvel Snap game files since the very beginning. They have, in some cases, logos or artwork or stats or effects that you can piece together into a complete card, but that card has just never actually been released. There are some others that were in that state that did eventually hit the game, and I think for most of these, given they're pretty popular characters in many cases, we will expect these to hit Marvel Snap eventually too. Will they look exactly like they look today? Maybe in some cases. In other cases, I think they're going to be pretty different, and in fact, I, in this video, took some attempts to kind of update them for the modern Marvel Snap world. So we're just going to run through all of these lost cards and talk about how they might fit into Marvel Snap today. Kicking things off here with Mephisto. This is one of the craziest ones of the entire set. He's a 6/0 that reads, if you win this game, double your winnings. Now that might be resources you win from the game, things like boosters, but I think probably more fitting is cubes. So, you know, instead of getting an 8-cube game, you might get a 16-cube game. Or perhaps if you somehow created copies of these, I don't know, you play them in Bar Sinister, for instance, you get 4 Mephistos. You might double your winnings 4 times. What is that? 16, 32, 64, 128 cubes? Could you really get 128 cubes in one game? Might be tough to win a game if you're playing a 6/0. though, so you probably have to run this in something like a Mr. Negative deck. That makes this, you know, that 0/6. You can probably tutor this out of your deck with Jane Foster, like all your other 0-cost stuff. Then it's less of a price to pay. You're not drawing a dead card or spending 6 on a totally dead card. So weaving it into a Mr. Negative deck might not be a problem. You could even maybe set up like an Arnim Zola play to get 2 of these and go for like a 32 cube game if you feel confident with the rest of your plays, some Iron Mans and Mystiques and so on. But this card is I will say, like, pretty darn specific. I think it would have to only be in Mr. Negative decks. Nobody else is going to win games while playing a 6/0. So I don't know that it really fits the modern version of Marvel Snap. I don't know that it'd be great if they released a card like this where it's so specific to one archetype and it's not even really impacting the game itself. It's kind of just impacting your rewards. So I do really like this effect. I think this would be very neat to exist, but I almost think this needs to be released as like a bonus card or something, not one you'd collect through normal means, but they send it out to everybody on Halloween or something as a reward so that it can be a fun little thing people play with, but not necessarily a card you're like spending 6,000 tokens on or a few, you know, spotlight keys or whatever. That might be a little off for Mephisto, but I do like this effect a lot, and I kind of hope this finds its way to the game in one way or another. So moving on, I wanted to take a look here at a card with a little bit more gameplay impact, but only a little bit more. This is Flatman, and I think this is placeholder artwork, and I know that this logo doesn't exist because I made it myself. Wanted to have some fun while making these cards. But Flatman is a 2/2 with ongoing adjacent locations have +1 power, and that is basically just a tiny Mr. Fantastic. It's like a little cheaper, less of a buff on those adjacent locations. 4 total power for a 2-cost card that just doesn't feel competitive. This is actually kind of a Squirrel Girl in some ways that doesn't take up space, but costs more, doesn't get buffed by Kazar, etc. So this card just to me does not have a chance if it existed at this level. So I took a crack at kind of updating this and maybe making it more interesting. Maybe adding a little too much complexity, but that's kind of fun too. So what if instead he said ongoing adjacent locations have +3 power if there are fewer than 2 cards there, and fewer than 2 means specifically 1 or 0. Thought it was important that it was 0 so that you could use this as a priority development card where you just really want to win priority early. This is a 3/2/3 that even if you give up that power later as you start to add more stuff, maybe for some reason or another, managing that early priority is really advantageous to you. So that's something we have a little bit of here and there in Marvel Snap. Things like Squirrel Girl, Mr. Fantastic do exist in that space, but this would really amp it up because, like, you know, suddenly 8 instant power added on turn 2 could be really nice. Could also, of course, play into the Namor world of cards being on their own. So you could push this into like a Namor and Namora shell where you only have one big thing and Flatman's adding a really nice +3 and Nomura's adding +5. There's something kind of cool there as well. So, you know, priority number one design case, and, you know, Nomura stuff is there too. Kind of gives a different look to Mr. Fantastic and Miss Marvel, but also in the same sort of vein as well. So for me, I don't know, this just made it a little more interesting and have a little bit of extra utility. So sometimes this would end up being only a 2/2 in some cases, but others times would feel like a 2/8 total output. And, you know, if you get any ongoing bonuses, you could build like a stacked lane with Flatman and Mr. Fantastic and Onslaught or something and try to win with just that. Maybe Omega Red's in the mix too, all the dudes with long arms going all in on a single lane. So some fun angles there. But yeah, I think you need more than just mini Mr. Fantastic to really make this one stand out. So that's my take. So moving on, we've got Viv Vision. This is a 2/3 that reads, when you move a card to a location, move this card there as well, which that effect as it currently exists doesn't really have a lot of upside in Marvel Snap. We just don't have a lot of cards that benefit from something else moving to their spot. It's basically Craven, and that's it. And when you build like move synergy stuff, it's always just Craven. And then all the other scaling move things that get stats from movement are tied to themselves. You know, the Human Torches, the Vultures, the Daggers of the world, etc. A Viv Vision tagging along would actually probably create problems more than would it help, because it's like board space becomes awkward. It'd be hard to plan things out. So I just don't think she'd help much. The occasional Craven proc doesn't feel like it would do quite enough for Viv Vision in that case. So I wanted to build a totally different look on Viv Vision that ties into Vision himself. So what if you gave her a premium stat line as a 2/5, maybe even a 2/6? I'd be willing to talk about that. And you can move this each turn just like Vision, but since it's such an early game card and that could offer a lot of advantage over time, what if you lose 1 power each time you move her? So there could still be some Craven things to net some upside basically here and there. But ultimately, you know, if you want to move her around for priority advantages, to trigger things, to create space, then you're going to have to sacrifice a little bit of power to do that. But if you don't want to move her, she's just a 2/5, like a really nice, just premium stat line on your 2-drop. You don't have to move her necessarily, but you could see this maybe in action in things like those tempo move decks, play her on an Angela. You might be willing to give up that spot for 1 power. So I don't know. I just like that this ties into Vision, but offers that early game opportunity. And, you know, we know that cards that can just move in general are really good. We've seen Nocturne and Jeff and Nightcrawler, all these things, giving you access to those other locations. So Vision probably could fill a similar spot, but I think this is a neat little design, like flexibility, but at cost. The question is a 2/6 possible for this? I think maybe in modern day Marvel Snap, a 2/6 would be fine. So next up here is Bullseye. This is a character, I mean, a pretty recognizable character, actually. Surprised we haven't seen him in Marvel Snap just yet. He is a 1/2 currently, with on reveal, the next card you draw will be a 2-cost card if any are left. And yeah, I think that actually seems totally fine. In fact, fits really well into the kind of speed and Wiccan world where you're just trying to fill those early curve spots guaranteed. You know, right now you might do a Quicksilver, but a lot of those decks are ditching Quicksilver and running, you know, a suite of 1-drops, 3 or 4 1-drops to make sure they hit the 1. Bullseye would actually be the perfect sort of 1 to hit for that kind of deck. You might not need a lot of 2s in that case, so you could open up your curve a little bit to make sure you find stuff. But this also could exist as a tutor if you have some really important 2-drop. You want to make sure you're hitting as early as possible, as consistently as possible. I don't know, an Angela or whatever. You just want to make sure Angela comes down ASAP so you can scale her up. I'm sure there are much better examples if you think of them. You know, Bullseye's a way to do that. Just increase that consistency. I thought about tweaking this and like playing for different costs. You know, the next card you draw will be 3 costs and make him 2. Definitely could be a possibility, but I don't know. I think this exists in a pretty fun space, and it's probably hard to design good 1-drops in Marvel Snap. And I think this is a pretty nice looking 1-drop. So I wouldn't be shocked at all if this came out exactly as it is. I don't know that it feels particularly Bullseye-y. Like he's not, you know, throwing it at things, destroying things. You know, he's not like sniping things other than the cost of the card. But, you know, at least implies some degree of accuracy at the very least. So moving on here, we have another actually really recognizable character for me. This is Stryfe, a 3/7. And he reads, if your opponent has 12 plus power here at the end of any turn, destroy this, which is a pretty cool mechanic idea here. Like, forcing your opponent to commit pretty hard to win a given location. And if they do, of course, you're falling way behind because, you know, suddenly you lose your 7 power card. So the question becomes, like, are you going to prevent them from getting to 12 power? Are you going to support this, like with goblins, for instance? Send over a goblin so they can't get that big. Are you going to clog them out with rocks so they can't easily get 12 power? Or are you going to maybe just say, hey, okay, go ahead and get 12, but I'm going to deal with other things. I'm going to solve other problems while you do, kind of making you overcommit to that spot. So you play like a Nebula over here and a Stryfe over here, and you're splitting your opponent's attention a little bit. You could also, you know, of course, just protect this with your own armors and various things. Now, the one thing I'll say is I think this needs to be bigger. I don't think 7 is nearly enough upside. I think 3 drops have just creeped up in stats so much that a 7 doesn't feel worth it. I think you got to push this to like 9 or something so that it feels notably bigger than normal 3 drops. So if you do commit an armor, if you do commit more to it, it doesn't feel like, there's so much risk inherent to it because you've actually got a pretty big number you're trying to support there, as opposed to 7, which currently it's like so easy to get 7. Why would you even bother playing this? So I do like this mechanic idea a lot. There's something kind of fun happening there, but I just think the numbers need to be tweaked. All right, so next up here is Toad, a 2/3 with on reveal, move the last card you played to this location, which might sound really familiar because that is just Ghost Spider. They probably were going to do the same thing where his tongue kind of jumps out and grabs stuff, kind of like Ghost Spider does with the web, which clearly we got to update that. It can't be Ghost Spider, which we know 2/3 Ghost Spider also just wasn't very good. So what if we did this? A 3/2 Toad with on reveal, force a 1 cost card here to switch sides. And I left that sort of generically symmetrical. It's not a enemy 1 cost card switching sides. So you could, for instance, send your hood over to the opponent, or alternatively, you could take your opponent's Nebula and pull it to you. That means you have to be kind of careful if you're playing your own 1 cost stuff, because you might accidentally send something to your opponent when you wanted to steal theirs. But it exists as a counter of sorts that's in a slightly better or different space than something like Electra, which just wipes it out, or Killmonger, which just wipes it out. It's like, instead of deleting that power, what if we steal it instead? Which I thought that was pretty cool, like him sticking his tongue out and grabbing things. I kind of debated a lot on power level for this card, and is it too swingy or too big? But not usually, right? There's really only like the Nebulas or the Sunspots that get huge. Some Silver Sables and stuff are small these days. Usually this kind of looks like a 3/8 at best. You steal something for 3, you kind of net 3, right? With some risk as well, because you might grab a rock or a squirrel that's sitting next to it instead, and some downside because you can't maybe easily play it next to your own 1 cost thing. So I don't know, just a fun spin on him sticking his tongue out, and some tongue and stuff. I don't know. Well, let me know what you think though for this version of Toad. So moving on here to Night Nurse. This is a 2/2 on reveal. Add all cards you discarded or destroyed last turn to your hand, which is, I think, actually pretty cool. I don't have any tweaks for this one. It's nice and cheap, which is cool. It's a value generator. I think it could allow you to do things like destroy bounce decks. You know, instead of playing Beast, Falcon, or whatever to bounce cards back, you could just play like a Carnage to eat them, and then use a Night Nurse to get them back. There is kind of a delay that happens because it's based on the last turn. Then, of course, if you're adding them to hand on this turn, you have to wait until the next turn to actually play all those things. So it's not something you could do really rapidly, but might still line up, you know, play a couple things early, do a Carnage on turn 2 or a Venom on turn 3, play Night Nurse on 4, play a bunch of stuff on 5 again. You know, there's definitely some lines there. So I think it's kind of cool. It also plays to discard as well. So haven't even really thought about that, but it's like a hedge a little bit. If you accidentally discard your Hela or something, you can actually get your Hela back with your Night Nurse. I don't know that you need or want to do that always. Some decks don't want to have to run that risk. They're built to avoid that problem, but it gives you a kind of a backup plan, or just more cool stuff. You discard a shard from your Dakin, and then you get another shard back, and you go again and discard it again, right? There's some cool little lines that are possible there. So I think this actually looks pretty good and pretty cool. This is a well-designed card. So moving on over to Jonah Jameson. This one's definitely a meme card, and I don't think it would ever be added to the game as is. A 1/1 with ongoing. Your emotes are ruder. Or I guess if it did get added, you know, maybe it would be like we talked about with Mephisto, some kind of reward card, April Fool's card, whatever it is. We haven't seen that happen yet though, so why not, right? But I wanted to update it and kind of keep the meme status a little bit, but maybe have it have some kind of technical impact on the game. So my version is after your opponent emotes, +1 power, which importantly is not an ongoing effect. I didn't want this to be something you could let them emote all game and then drop it on turn 6 and it's like 20 power or whatever. So this has to be played first, like Angela or something. It has to be on board for this to start impacting things, but it's one of those where you slam it down, you're like, hey, I dare you to emote, dude. I dare you to give me +1 power. Maybe you start this at like a 1/2 or a 1/3, so there's like, you know, no downside to it. It's just like a 1/2 like any other 1-drop, and then maybe it gets scaled up if the opponent forgets or don't notice or decide it's worth it, or they want to Shang-Chi it, so they emote 9 times in a row and it goes up to 110 and then they just Shang-Chi it, right? I think there's at least some fun here. If people have echo blindness, maybe they'd also have Jonah Jameson blindness, and that could make this kind of fun and maybe sort of impactful. So next up here is random. This is a 4/0 with on reveal. Set this card's power equal to the power of a random card in your deck. There you go. The word random appeared in the card text. See what they did? That's amazing. But I think this card's pretty close. I don't have any major revisions on this one. This lives in that kind of Jubilee space, almost like a Dracula space as well, where you're trying to get your 4 costs to cheat out something really big. Jubilee does that from deck. Dracula does that from hand. Jubilee, I would argue, though, has notably more upsides than this random. She's thinning out the deck, which can be useful. She's proccing on reveal effects, which can be useful. We've seen that, you know, with hidden Odin and then go again kind of thing. And she can also still just pull big stats like Infinite or whatever. Random is a little bit more limited in that, you know, he's probably just pulling the big stats and that's when you're happy. But there are some instances of, you know, you had like Red Skull or something. Jubilee into Red Skull has some downside. You're buffing your opponent. Random into Red Skull, you just get the stats and you're happy. So I wonder if this needs that kind of Dracula treatment where it says gain the power of a card in your deck or something, and it starts at like 4/3, so you're just nudging it up a little, and you maybe don't have to build your deck so restrictively, because even if you hit something that's like 7 power, you're still really happy because you got a 4/10, as opposed to, you know, right now, if you hit 7 power, you're like, ah, man, a 4/7 is not great. I'm not too excited about that. So maybe you could make it cheaper technically, maybe just give it a bigger base that gains. Few different ways to approach this, but I do think this design is actually pretty cool. Maybe there just need to be more like big downside cards like Red Skull, and you build a deck full of those and stuff random in there. That could be a way for this to get played too. But I think this is a fairly good fit even for modern Marvel Snap. All right, so next up here, let's take a look at Goblin Queen, a 2/3 on reveal. Other cards can't be revealed this turn, which is, I think, a little too close to the super giant space where you're kind of trying to deny your opponent's plays. Obviously distinct in a few ways. Super giant is not just on reveals. Super giant is end of game. So there is a unique angle for Goblin Queen, and she could be a sort of location agnostic Cosmo. Like, she just works across all locations because she's basically a Lemuria. If you feel like you really have to stop an opponent's on reveal right now, and somehow that's going to set up their next play or discount something or whatever it is, right? You need to make sure it goes away at a key time. You could try to line up your Goblin Queen. I think that's going to be tough to do just from a priority standpoint. Like, this has to have priority for that. It just seems like it's maybe not quite good enough. So I totally reworked Goblin Queen here just out of my own fun, because her name's Goblin and I wanted to make her like Green Goblin and Hobgoblin, even though I don't think has anything to do with either of those characters, but she's the Goblin Queen for God's sake. So I changed her cost and turned her into this. On reveal, the first on reveal card played next turn switches sides, which again, this is symmetrical, so this could be yours or your opponent's depending on priority. If you drop priority, then you know, you are hopefully going to steal something of your opponents. They want to play their Black Panther on turn 5. Well, sorry, Goblin Queen's going to deny that. You're going to have to wait. If you have priority, you know, you could send them a hood or something that's still beneficial for you. But I like that this kind of gives that goblin switching sides thing a different angle. Now, is this too disruptive? Is it too good? You know, if you like played this on turn 5 and your opponent wanted to slam a big, awesome on reveal to win the game on 6, maybe. But, you know, a lot of those on reveals, their power is baked into the reveal itself, which the opponent would still realize. So they played a Spectrum or something, you know, they would still benefit from the Spectrums on reveal, at least as my intention. I don't know if the wording somehow changes that, but my intent is that they would still get the Spectrum on reveal. You would just get the 6 power body. And then it's like, well, that's pretty swingy for a 4-cost card, but there's also ways for them to play around it. If they play something tiny, or if they play a hood, you know, sometimes you can be punished and you maybe didn't do much, and they may not have an on reveal. They may just play another big ongoing card or something, and you get punished in a totally different way, and you just played a 4/4. So I think the kind of conditionality and the knowledge aspect where your opponent gets the information they need doesn't make this too toxic or too powerful, although I'm definitely curious to hear takes on that. This might be one that once you play it in practice, it feels really bad. But in theory, at least, I like the idea of going a different direction and playing towards the goblins, because she is indeed the Goblin Queen. So next up here is Witchfire. This is a 2/3 with on reveal, your opponent draws a card, increase its cost by 1, which this is just not good enough. Like, drawing a card is really valuable. Increasing the cost of something by 1 is meaningful sometimes, but you know, the opponent's just really happy to have an extra card, and they probably don't care too much that it costs 1 extra. This is just worse than Baron Mordo that's in the game right now, and Baron Mordo is really, really bad. So I don't see how Witchfire in this way ever makes sense. So what if instead Witchfire said on reveal, each player draws a card, increase the cost of your opponents by 1. So in this case, you are also getting a card, kind of that crystal card draw symmetry, and you're punishing your opponent's card. So they're still getting something. They're not too mad that it costs 1 extra, but you're also getting something, which of course feels a lot better. Marvel Snap has always said they're really hesitant to give the game too much card draw, which I understand the theory behind that. You have really small decks. You don't want too much card draw because it makes games play out too identically over time, because you get so much of your deck seen in any given game that there's just like no variance in how games unfold. So if you had Witchfire and Crystal, etc., combos and so on might be achieved too easily. That said, in practice, I don't really think that's proven true. It's not like there isn't enough variance added through locations and your opponent's draws, and like where things are played is a form of variance as well, that I don't think this would add too much consistency, particularly because, you know, the opponent is also still benefiting as well. Nico is a great example of that. Like, Nico has draw 2 in it, and the Nico draw 2, it is really good, of course, but it hasn't like broken the game. It is again baked behind variance because it's a 1 in 6 or whatever, but still, I don't think when Nico draws cards it feels like the game is just completely ruined or anything. So I think introducing a little bit more card draw would not be too dangerous. Maybe this could still say, increase the cost of both cards by 1, so that you also suffered the punishment a little bit. If you just wanted card draw really badly, really affordably, and you don't care about the cost increase, maybe Witchfire is the way to go. But I think either of those would work just fine. So next up here is Slingshot, which I think is called Yo-Yo in the game, but I believe Yo-Yo's actual character name is Slingshot, like her code name or whatever. And Slingshot is a 1/2 that reads, when this card moves, move it back with +1 power, which is kind of cool. But I don't like that it demands you move it. Like, it's really hard to move stuff. And if you are going to be moving things, there are much higher premiums of cards to move. Like, why would I want to move this compared to Human Torch or Dagger or Vulture? Those all scale way more. A +1 power is just not a meaningful enough movement option. So instead, I updated Slingshot here to say, after you play a card, move there to gain +1 power. So in other words, kind of a mini Werewolf by Night. It scales slower and it doesn't demand on reveals. There's a part of me that thinks this is too powerful because, if you play, there's 5 turns, but you could still, play 7-8 cards, even more in a bounce deck or something. Maybe this just gets too big for a 1-drop. If it gets into that 1/6, 1/7, 1/8, 1/10 territory, that is pretty powerful. I mean, I will say 1-drops have always had susceptibility, and that's certainly not bigger than Human Torch can get. as far as a 1-drop moving multiple times. So it's a little easier to work with perhaps than Human Torch, but doesn't have that same kind of ceiling. So I think this might be okay. And I like that, you know, this still supports things like Craven as well. You got ways to move things around. And it is sometimes still limited by board space and positioning, much like Werewolf by Night. It can be tough sometimes because you accidentally lock yourself out in a location or run out of ways to move this. So maybe this would need to be like a 2-drop with the same kind of effect, but you also want it to feel distinct a little bit from Werewolf by Night. So maybe not the right direction to go, but I think pushing the limits on this one's not too crazy. Oh, what do you know? I'm out of cards. That was all the cards. So yeah, I guess let me know what you guys think about these. What cards are you excited to see, either in their current state or perhaps in various updated states, whether that's my take or some way you would change it to make it more impactful or better or interesting. I want to hear all those thoughts down in the comments below. But I'm excited to see when these cards finally hit, man. I you know, so many of these have been sitting there forever. I've been waiting and waiting and waiting, and particularly characters like Stryfe. I always loved Stryfe, one of the coolest villains I thought in the X-Men universe. So I'd love to see this guy. Just make him maybe a little bigger to make him feel good. But Mephisto also sounds really cool, whether it's this effect or otherwise. So anyway, share those thoughts down below. Stay tuned for some more videos. I've been out of town. When you're watching this, I will be out of town visiting family. So this video is kind of a placeholder instead of regular gameplay. So if you're missing gameplay, don't worry. We'll try to get back to that as soon as we can. But in the meantime, hopefully you still enjoyed this look at some long lost cards. And thank you as always for watching. And until next time, game on.